Morning, everybody. Keep that image in mind. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, in case you're confused. So we are in a series this summer where we're looking at phrases, commonly used phrases in the culture. Some of them are commonly used in church culture. Some of them are commonly used in the broader culture. But what we're saying is these aren't just benign sayings, that behind them is really an understanding of who God is and how God works and about our role in the world and so forth. And so they warrant our taking a look at them and asking the question, are these things true? Are they things that we need to be paying attention to? How do they pass muster with the Scriptures? And so we started the series by looking at the commonly used phrase, "It's all good." And then Pastor Rick, a couple of weeks ago, looked at, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you believe in Jesus. And then last week, Heather Mandela unpacked for us the commonly used phrase, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," or the church version of that, "God won't give you more than you can handle." And so these are really, behind them are theological statements, and they are worthy of our taking a look at them and asking, is this true? I hope, our hope is that part of what this does is it inspires you to carry the conversation on in the week, and because these are familiar phrases, and what do you think about those, and how do you unpack those? So that's what we're in the midst of. This morning we're looking at this one. I became aware of it, some 20-some years ago, where people began to say, I'm spiritual, not religious. I'm spiritual, not religious. And when I first began to hear that, I thought, well, wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty cool. So the question is that true? And I think it's kinda, sorta, but not really. All of these have truth in them, and that's part of the point as well, that all of them contain some elements of truth, some more than others, but there is truth to them, and so we want to look at not only where they fall short, but the truth that they share as well. Well, one of the things that sociologists and pollsters have been agreeing on is that the millennial generation, the generation that was born from the folks at the end of the baby boom and Gen Xers. So those folks had children that became part of this gigantic population in the United States that sociologists have labeled the millennial generation. And millennials, sociologists agree, are the least religious group of people probably in American history. The least religious people in American history. So pollsters are telling us that still today, 9 out of every 10 Americans say when asked, do you believe in God? Yes, I believe in God. And so I guess that's encouraging that 90% of the population believes in God. But as you begin to drill down into that a little bit further, it gets less good, at least from my perspective, and particularly with regard to this young generation of millennials. This isn't millennial bashing, by the way. This is just a reality, a sociological reality. I know that it's a disparaged generation, and not for any particular, when we were this age, folks hated us too. Like, they thought we were terrible, right? And nobody likes Gen Xers, so, this is not about disparaging this generation of folks. It's just to say this is who they are right now. So, 30% of millennials, people between the ages of 18 and 29, 30% say they have serious doubts about the existence of God. 30% have serious doubts about the existence of God. In the 1980s, that same age group, when polled about God, only 13% said they had serious doubts. So that's a significant move, a significant trend away from belief in God in just one generation. 30% significant doubt or serious doubt about the existence of God. In 1998, so just a half a generation ago, 1998, 20 years, 49% of 18 to 29-year-olds describe themselves as either moderately or very religious. So almost half of 18 to 29-year-olds describe themselves as moderately or very religious. In 2014, that same age group, 18 to 29, only 38% describe themselves that way. So again, in just 20 years, less than 20 years, a significant drop in a generation of people who describe themselves as either moderately or very religious, and it's still, even at that, it's still a very low number. So the trend isn't good. There is one thing that the millennials actually had a higher percentage of than boomers or Xers. When asked the question, do you believe in a life after death, 80% of millennials believe there's a life after death that they'll experience. So they don't think they believe in God. They're not religious, but they're confident that they're going to live forever. The person who did this most recent poll is a PhD psychology professor from San Diego State University. And reflecting on just those numbers that I shared, she said this: it was interesting that fewer people participate in religion or prayed, but believed in an afterlife. It might be part of a growing entitlement mentality, thinking you can get something for nothing. Ouch. That's from a PhD psychology person. So the trend isn't good, and increasingly, I think, folks are outside of the church. So we know that the church is experiencing decline and has been, really back to the boomer generation. So boomers, a large portion of the boomer generation, as they became adults, left the church. Some came back, but a bunch never did. They then gave birth to the Gen X and the front end of the millennial generation. And so increasingly, we have less and less connection to the church. And so people are saying, either I am not spiritual at all, or I am spiritual but not religious. As I have heard that phrase over the years, I ask the next question, so what do you mean by that? What do you mean you're spiritual but not religious? I'm just curious about what that means to somebody who says that. And I've heard some kind of themes as people have tried to give me a little more information. So for some, they get a little defensive and they say, it means that just because I don't go to church doesn't mean I don't believe in God. Okay, I just was asking. I wasn't taking attendance, I'm just curious. So, I believe in God, even though I don't attend church, is what it means for some. Some people, what it means to them is religious people are terrible and spiritual people are nice. Right? I mean, so all of this stuff about church people are judgmental, and church people are dogmatic, and church people are mean, and church people are haters, and all of that stuff. I'm not one of those. I'm in this other camp of nice people. Some people, when they say that, just say religion is outdated. It was for a bygone era, and to be spiritual is to be contemporary. And for others, it's just a conversation stopper. A lot of these phrases are ways of just, putting something out there. I don't want to discuss it, and so it just means I'm a spiritual person, and I don't want to discuss it any further. But what does it really mean? So to get at what I think, is behind this, we have to understand the terms, right? So spiritual means something. Religion means something. Let's at least agree on what the terms mean. And so for that, I went to the dictionary, which everybody can agree on, especially dictionary.com. It's the most widely used dictionary right now. And so what does dictionary.com say that spiritual means? And here's what it says, and the words are on the screen. Of or relating to the spirit or soul as distinguished from the physical nature. Okay? So to say I'm spiritual is a recognition that there is something more than just the physical world that I see. That there is something called spirit, there's something called soul. It's not, you can't see it, smell it, feel it, touch it, but it exists, and it's, outside of the natural nature, solid things that I see. So to say I'm not spiritual, if somebody were to say I'm not spiritual at all, that is an atheist. Okay? What does atheism? Atheism is without, theism, God, without God. So an atheist is somebody who says there is no soul, there is no spiritual world, everything can be seen, everything that happened as a result of some kind of cosmic accident that set a chain reaction that resulted in our life, and we live a few short decades on this planet, and then we cease to exist. So for somebody who says, I'm not spiritual, that's their kind of theology, that's their perspective, that's their philosophy on life. So to say I'm spiritual says, no, there is something more than what I see. I'm spiritual. Now, religion is described this way in dictionary.com. Religion is this: a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, especially when considered as the creation of a superhuman agency or agencies. I love that description. And never heard of God as an agency, but God, Inc. Usually involving devotional and ritual observances, often containing a moral code governing the conduct of human affairs. So a more description here of beyond just spiritual, that there's an understanding that there is something or things that led to the creation, and that thing requires a certain kind of response from us, rituals and observances and so forth, and calls us to some kind of conduct in the ways that we behave in life. So that's the nature of religion. Both of these have real problems with them as just an identity for who I am as a person. To say that I am spiritual, and that's where it ends, is really to say that while I believe that I have a soul and so forth, what that means and who God is, if there even is a God, and what I'm supposed to do with and about that God, and how I behave in the world, all of that is up to me because I'm spiritual, which generally means that I have my own beliefs. And those beliefs came as a result of any number of things that I've read, things that I've heard, things that I've seen, things that I've done It's all kind of my own invention of how I understand this deity or this agency to work. It's, in essence, being the ruler of an island that you occupy by yourself. You are the lone person on this island called spirituality, and everything about your spirituality is your own. It's not based on anything other than on your own understanding, right? So religion, then, is got its problems as well. Religion can become so enamored with its own sense of itself, its own understandings and dogmas, its own traditions and rites and so forth, that it loses any real connection to a deity, to God, and it becomes all about self-promotion and being well-organized and well-ordered and having processes and systems in place and so forth. It's deadly. And it turns people away, and it turns people off. And there's a reason why religion has a negative connotation to people. There's a reason for that. It didn't happen by accident. Back in the mid part of the 20th century, there was a theologian, A.W. Tozer, who, an American theologian reflecting on the church of the United States at that time, and he became increasingly disgruntled about the state of the church. And this is in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, when the church really was thriving. In that time period in this country, churches were springing up all over the place. They were expanding. They were building education wings. The families, the builder generation, my parents' generation, those folks that were informed in childhood by the Great Depression and World War II, those folks were going to church in droves and bringing this boom of children with them. And so, the church was thriving in terms of numbers. But spiritually, in terms of the focus of the church, it was increasingly losing its way. And Tozer was angry about that and was writing about that, and he wasn't necessarily doing it in the kindest of terms. One of the things that Tozer wrote about the church at that time was this: 100 religious persons knit together into a unity carefully excuse me, let me try that again. 100 religious persons knit into a unity by careful organization do not constitute a church any more than 11 dead men make a football team. I know. He wasn't happy about the church. So just because you call yourself a church, just because you have these religious activities and so forth, doesn't mean that you are faithful. So, am I spiritual? Kinda, sorta. Am I religious? Kinda, sorta, but not really. I have come to call myself, when it comes to talking about my faith, if you want to know where I stand on this, what I would share with folks is I am a follower of Jesus. If that to you makes me religious, okay. If that to you makes me spiritual, okay. But the way I would self-identify is I am a follower of Jesus. And that means something. Because Jesus introduces us to an understanding of faith and life that is relational. We are not to do life alone. You and I were created to be in relationship. Relationship with God and relationship with other human beings. We are called into relationship with one another, not into isolation. That's who we understand God to be. That's what we understand our faith to be. And that those relationships are guided by this radical principle called love. The way we talk about it here at Hope Church is through our vision statement. We say that we connect people to God through a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. We are called into a relationship with God that is dynamic and living and active. It's a relationship. And it grows as a relationship. We are called to be in relationship with God. We don't have an unknown God, that we know God, and we know God best in the person of Jesus. That as we read about, as we see Jesus, we understand who God is. We know the truth. We know the way, God's way, and we have life as we relate to Jesus. And then as a follower of Jesus, I'm called into a communal life. And the way we talk about it in our vision statement is that we want to connect with one another in authentic Christian community. That our vision is to be Christ followers together, and that we have a community life together that is described in Scripture of what that's supposed to look like. And then ultimately, we go from this community out into the world. And the way we talk about it in our vision statement is we want to connect the church, the gathering, Christ followers, to the world to be salt and light. That's who I am. That's what my faith is about. And so I want to just spend the time remaining looking at a piece of Scripture. It's from the book of Hebrews, the 10th chapter. And there are several verses that I call the lettuce verses. Not lettuce like the vegetable. It's not that this is a leafy thing good for you to eat. It's let us. You probably got that, but I thought I needed to explain it. Let us, L-E-T, us, let us. So in verse 22, 23, 24, 25, each of those verses starts with the words, let us. Notice it's plural. Not let me, not let you, not let I, let me, let us. Called into community. So, as the writer of this chapter begins to describe it, he's describing this new relationship we have to God because of Jesus. So verses 20 and 21, here's what it says. By his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through which the curtain into the most holy place. And since we have a great high priest who has ruled over God's house, pause. So he's describing the scene. It's from the original temple for the Jewish people. Within the temple, all the way at the farthest end of the temple is this small room called the Holy of Holies. No one was permitted to go into the Holy of Holies except for the high priest one time a year after going through an extensive personal time of cleansing himself. And then he would go in that one time to pray for the nation, to pray for the people, God's people. And dividing that Holy of Holy Places from the other part of the temple was this great curtain, this great cloth, this kind of cloth wall that kept people out. And so what we know from the Gospels is that when Jesus was crucified and when he died on the cross, the Bible tells us that that great cloth, that tapestry, that divider was torn in two, opening up the holiest place for people to go in because of the sacrifice of Jesus. And so that's what's being described here. And Jesus is now in the position of the high priest. He is the one who goes in front of the Father and makes our case for forgiveness of our sin and allowing us to experience the love of God. The high priest, when he went in, was a guest in that room. Jesus is like, it's his place, it's his house. And so this is the high priest that we have. This is this new relationship we have in God. What's our relationship to God? What's your relationship to God? Our relationship to God is those who know sin but have been invited into the Holy of Holies. Okay, so verse 22, here's where the let us begins. Let us go into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him, for our guilty consciences have been sprinkled with Christ's blood to make us clean, and our bodies have been washed with pure water. So this is a description of two rituals of the church in a sense. We have these rituals that we do, these two rituals, not because we want to be religious, not because we love rituals, but because they tell a deeply spiritual truth. What are those two rituals? Communion, the sprinkling of Jesus' blood. So his sacrifice on the cross, his blood covers our sin. And so we gather here in this place to receive communion. It's this physical reminder of Jesus' body broken, of Jesus' blood shed. And we take that sacrifice, which opens the Holy of Holies to us, we take it into ourselves. We do it in a physical way, but it's a profoundly spiritual truth. And then this idea of pure water is our baptism. That as we claim Christ, we are cleansed by the living water, Jesus. Now, if you've never been baptized, I want to just say a word to you. If you've never been baptized, this is an important part of your spiritual journey. It's a physical thing, to be sure, but an important thing. It says, I want to be cleansed of my sin by Jesus Christ. I want to be made pure through him before God. So if you've never been baptized, I would just encourage you and ask that you talk to me or talk to one of the other pastors on staff and just have a conversation about what that means and whether or not you feel like you're ready for that. But don't miss out on being baptized. Now, some of you were baptized maybe as children or as infants. And so it counts. Your baptism was good. You don't need to be baptized again. But in some cases, folks have had, this growth in their relationship with Christ. Significant growth. It's profoundly important to you. And you feel a desire to experience baptism as an adult. We won't re-baptize you, but what we do is we'll renew your baptismal vow. It's sort of like when a couple that's been married for a long time renews their wedding vows. It doesn't mean that, that whole time you've been married didn't count, and so now that I know what it means, now I want to get married. No, you were married the whole time. You were baptized this whole time, but maybe you want to have this experience of rededicating it. In either event, feel free to talk to myself or one of the other pastors on staff. I'd love to talk to you about that. So we can go before God. We can go into the Holy of Holies. We can go before this holy God in confidence, not because of who we are, not because of what we've done, but because of this sacrifice that Jesus made on our behalf. Verse 23. Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Let us hold tightly to the hope we affirm. What's the hope that we affirm? The hope we affirm is that we can stand in the presence of a holy God. We say that by faith right now because we don't see it. But the hope that we have, and it's a hope, not a wishful thinking, gosh, I hope it's right. It's the expectation that the faith that I have will be realized one day in the future. One day, you will stand in the presence of a holy God. When the time of your life on this planet ends, you will stand in the presence of God. And you can stand in God's presence confident because of this promise we have in Christ. You see, we're not making up our own religion. We're not making up our own faith. We're not inventing something. This faith comes to us down through thousands of years, through different languages and different cultures and different socioeconomic groups and so forth. All of this story of our faith in this great unity comes down through thousands of years of how God's work in the life of human beings and on this planet has gone to bring us to the point of salvation is a consistent story contained for us in His Word, the Bible. It's His promise. And you can have hope because His promises are true. Verse 24. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Why do we gather here on Sundays? Why did you come this morning? Because nobody invited you to the beach. I know, but beyond that, right? Why did we come? I mean, did you come, because we got a great band? Do you come, to hear some guy go on and on and on? You got nothing better to do? Why do you come? We come because we are called into community. And as a community, we don't show up just on a Sunday morning to put in our time, right? Because God is a God who takes attendance. At the end of your life, He looks at all of the Sundays of your life, and, if you hit 70%, you're in. I don't know what. Really? No, we come to encourage each other. We come to worship together. We come because we're called to be in community. And as a community, we are called to figure out ways to inspire one another to greater acts of love and good deeds. I love that. I love that. I was saying at first service, I haven't had a good idea in about 14 years. But I have heard great ideas coming from folks here. I'm like, man, that's so cool. That's a great... I was in a pastor meeting last week, and it was a group of pastors who were called together because they're doing some creative stuff in ministry. And so the agenda for this first meeting was just talk about some of the stuff going on in your church. So I talked for half an hour about you guys because you have so many cool things going on. But everybody told some story about what's going on in their church. One guy talked about the fact that folks in his church came up with this idea. They want to invite people in, and they're afraid that people in the town, are turned off by church or whatever. And so if we at least get them into the door, they can meet us, and maybe some good things will happen. And so they went around their town with packs of syrup and gave everybody they bumped into a pack of syrup with an invitation to their pancake breakfast. And the admission price was a pack of syrup. So if you bring your pack of syrup, you get a free pancake breakfast. And he said how cool it was. Just scores of people from the town just showed up for this pancake breakfast. They had a great time. Isn't that cool? I love that. Another one, this guy's church is in a low-income area, and the schools aren't very good, and so the church offered for kids, young kids, a Young Scholars Academy. It's going on throughout the summer, and it's basically tutoring these kids to bring them up to speed academically, and to do it in a great environment where they're encouraged and fed and all kinds of stuff. And isn't that cool? Like to do that in your community? Another, this is cool, right? You guys are with me? You're like, whatever. Pack of syrup. So last one. This church is near Princeton University, and they felt, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could reach students at the university? That's a tough crowd. You think you're tough? That's a tough crowd. Reaching college students at Princeton, really tough crowd. How do you reach them? And long story, but it came down to they decided that they would build a food truck and go to the campus in a food truck, which is like a thing apparently and food trucks are more and more popular. So this church built a food truck. And their deal was, we want to give them really good food, but we also want to minister to these kids. And so the people in the food truck who are preparing the food and so forth are just loving on these kids. And they also bring with them a food truck chaplain. So one member of the church will serve as chaplain. That person stands outside the truck, just talking with students as they're standing in line and so forth. And, if there's some need or something, they'll ask if they can pray for them and so forth. Isn't that cool? And then they invite them to their church, but not to come to a Sunday morning worship service because they're not crazy thinking that Princeton students are going to come on a Sunday morning. So they invite them to an internet cafe that they set up in their church where they have free Wi-Fi, they get coffee and some stuff to eat, and they can study there and are just in an environment where they're accepted and loved by people in the church. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Let us think of ways to inspire one another to acts of love and good works. That's why we come. To inspire and to encourage. We're not on our own little islands of spirituality where I've got my thing and my belief and it's mine and it's private and personal and don't talk about it because it's really... We're here to talk about it and encourage each other and to inspire each other to love and good service. Okay, lastly, verse 25. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of the Lord is drawing near. This life will not last forever. Sometimes we think it will, but it won't. And whether Jesus returns or we return to Jesus, this life is short. And the encouragement here is keep coming together. Keep drawing together. So the image that you saw at the opening of this message was a little fire pit. And the wood was burning, right? And then somebody reached down with a pair of tongs and pulled out a piece of wood and put it down on the patio. And did you notice how it went out? That's what happens in our life of faith. As soon as we start thinking that we can do it on our own, no matter how strong your faith may be, no matter how clear you might be about what it means to be a Christian and a follower and so forth, we all need each other to keep the fires burning, to keep the faith alive. We need one another. So am I spiritual? Kinda, sorta. Am I religious? Kinda, sorta. But really, who I am is a follower of Jesus. And my prayer is that you are as well. So let's stand for closing prayer. So Lord, thank you that you call us your own, that you love us enough to die for us, that you have made a way for us to stand in the presence of our Creator, a holy, all-powerful God. And we know, Lord, that sin matters. It hurts us, it hurts people around us, and it separates us from you. And so you've created a way through that you cover our sin with your sacrifice, and that you cleanse us and make us new. And for that, we are eternally grateful. And you call us, Lord, to be a part of this grand community called the church. Not because we need religion, but because we need relationship with one another to encourage and inspire one another. And that you call us to be in the world as salt and light. Help us to be that. We ask this in Christ's name. Now, friends, as you go into this new week, to be salt and light, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord be gracious to you today and always. Amen.